She laughed at his weakness, until he lifted the beast with one hand. The mocking apprentice, the rhythmic clang of hammer against steel echoed through the mountain forge, but the sound that cut deepest wasn't metal. It was Lydia Ironstone's laughter. "Look at those arms, Theron." She gestured mockingly at her apprentice as he struggled with a simple horseshoe. "I've seen scarecrows with more muscle. How do you expect to be a blacksmith when you can barely lift a hammer properly?" Theron Blackwell kept his head down, his lean frame bent over the anvil. Sweat dripped from his brow despite the autumn chill seeping through the stone walls of the forge. His hands, though calloused from months of work, trembled slightly as he attempted another strike. The horseshoe remained stubbornly unformed. "Maybe you should try needlework instead," Lydia continued, her voice dripping with disdain. "Seems more suited to your delicate constitution." Marcus, the other apprentice, shifted uncomfortably near the bellows. At 17, he was 2 years younger than Theron, but had already surpassed him in strength and skill, or so it appeared. Unlike Lydia, Marcus felt no joy in Theron's struggles, only a growing unease at their master's cruelty. Lydia Ironstone was a woman of imposing presence. At 42, she stood nearly 6 feet tall with arms like tree trunks and hands that could bend iron bars. Her reputation stretched across 3 kingdoms as the finest weaponsmith alive. Kings and generals sought her creations, and she wore her pride like armor, thick, impenetrable, and cold. "I don't understand why you keep him around," Marcus had once overheard a visiting merchant say. "The boy's clearly not cut out for this work." Lydia's response had been swift and cutting. "Someone has to sweep the floors and tend the fire. Even weaklings have their uses." But there were moments, fleeting, barely perceptible, when Marcus caught something else in Theron's eyes. A depth that seemed at odds with his apparent frailty, the way he sometimes paused mid-swing, not from exhaustion but as if holding something back, how his breathing remained steady even during the most grueling tasks, while Marcus gasped for air. The autumn day that changed everything began like any other. The forge glowed with orange light, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls adorned with Lydia's masterworks. Swords, axes, and shields hung in perfect rows, each one a testament to her unrivaled skill. Theron was attempting to forge a simple dagger blade when the sound of hoofbeats thundered up the mountain path. Through the open doors of the forge, they could see a column of riders approaching. Royal guards in burnished armor, their horses breathing hard from the steep climb. "Captain Roderick," Lydia said, recognizing the lead rider as he dismounted. She wiped her hands on her leather apron and stepped forward, her demeanor shifting to the professional respect she reserved for paying customers. "What brings the royal guard to my humble forge?" Captain Roderick was a grizzled veteran with scars mapping his weathered face like roads on an old parchment. His gray eyes held the weight of countless battles, and when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of one accustomed to being obeyed. "Master Ironstone, we come bearing a challenge that has stumped every smith and warrior in the capital." He gestured to 2 of his men, who struggled to lift something from a reinforced cart. "Behold, the hammer of Malachar." The weapon they carried was massive, easily 4 feet in length with a head the size of a wine barrel. Its surface was black as midnight, covered in intricate runes that seemed to writhe and shift in the firelight. The metal appeared to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating an unsettling void in the air above the cart. "By the gods," Lydia breathed, her eyes widening with a mixture of awe and avarice. "Is that dragon-forged steel?" "Yes. Ancient beyond measure and cursed according to legend." Roderick's men set the hammer down with a tremendous thud that shook the entire forge. Even resting on the ground, it radiated an ominous presence that made the hair on everyone's arms stand on end. "It was discovered in the ruins of Castle Shadowmere 3 months ago." Lydia circled the weapon like a predator stalking prey. "And you want me to reforge it? Repair whatever damage time has done?" "No." Roderick's smile was grim. "We want someone to lift it." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the fire seemed to quiet, as if waiting for an explanation. "Lift it?" Lydia repeated, her confusion evident. Not a single warrior in the king's service has been able to so much as budge that hammer. Knights who can swing two-handed swords like twigs. Strong men who've never met their match, all of them defeated by this cursed thing. Roderick gestured toward the weapon with a mixture of frustration and fear. The court wizard believes it will only respond to one truly worthy of wielding it. Someone with strength beyond the merely physical. Lydia's eyes lit up with understanding and ambition. And you think I might be that person? You're the strongest smith in the Three Kingdoms, Roderick confirmed. If anyone can claim this weapon, it would be you. Marcus watched as his master's chest swelled with pride. This was exactly the kind of challenge Lydia lived for. A chance to prove her superiority, not just in craftsmanship, but in raw power. She had always claimed that true strength came from the forge, that her years of working iron had made her stronger than any pampered noble or soldier. Stand back, Lydia commanded, rolling up her sleeves to reveal arms corded with muscle. Let me show you how it's done. She approached the hammer with confidence, cracking her knuckles in preparation. The runes along its surface seemed to pulse with darker energy as she drew near, but Lydia either didn't notice or didn't care. Grasping the handle with both hands, she set her feet in a wide stance and pulled. Her face immediately reddened with effort, veins standing out on her temples as she strained against the immovable object. The muscles in her arms bulged, her breath came in sharp gasps, but the hammer remained perfectly still. Just need to find the right angle, she panted, adjusting her grip and trying again. This time she threw her entire body into the effort, her boots sliding on the stone floor as she fought against the weapon's supernatural weight. Still nothing. Marcus felt a pang of sympathy as he watched his master's confidence crumble. Lydia tried 3 more times, each attempt more desperate than the last, until finally she staggered backward, her hands cramping and her pride in tatters. Impossible, she whispered, staring at the hammer as if it had personally insulted her. I've lifted anvils heavier than that. I've carried full suits of armor like they were made of paper. Captain Roderick nodded grimly. That was the reaction of every other person who attempted it. The weapon chooses its wielder, not the other way around. Let me try again, Lydia insisted. But even as she spoke, everyone could see the defeat in her eyes. Her legendary strength had failed her completely, and for the first time in decades, she had encountered something she couldn't overcome through sheer force of will. It was then that Theron stepped forward. May I? He asked quietly, his voice barely audible over the crackling of the forge fire. The silence that followed was profound. Lydia stared at him as if he had sprouted wings, while Captain Roderick's men exchanged glances that ranged from confused to openly amused. You? Lydia's voice cracked with disbelief. You can barely lift a proper hammer, and you think you can succeed where I failed? But something in Theron's posture had changed. The perpetual slouch was gone, replaced by a straightness that made him seem taller somehow. His pale blue eyes, usually downcast, now met Lydia's gaze directly. Sometimes, he said softly, strength isn't what it appears to be. Before anyone could stop him, Theron approached the hammer of Malachar. The runes along its surface began to glow, not with the dark energy they had shown before, but with a pure silver light that filled the forge like moonbeams. He reached down with his right hand, not grasping the handle with both hands as Lydia had done, but simply wrapping his fingers around it as one might pick up a walking stick. The hammer rose from the ground as if it weighed nothing at all. Gasps echoed through the forge as Theron lifted the massive weapon effortlessly, the silver light growing brighter until it seemed to emanate from his very skin. He held it aloft for a moment, perfectly balanced before gently setting it back down. The light faded, leaving everyone staring in stunned silence at the unassuming young man who had just accomplished the impossible. Lydia's mouth hung open, her face cycling through emotions, shock, confusion, and something that might have been fear. For the first time in her life, she was truly speechless. Captain Roderick was the first to find his voice. "Who are you?" he asked, his hand instinctively moving to his sword hilt. Theron looked at each face in turn, Marcus's wide-eyed wonder, the guard's suspicious alertness, and finally Lydia's shattered worldview. "Just someone who's been hiding for a very long time," he said quietly. "But I think that time is over." The forge fell silent except for the whisper of wind through the mountain peaks, carrying with it the promise that nothing would ever be the same again. The truth unveiled. The silence stretched like a bowstring pulled taut until Captain Roderick finally spoke, his voice hoarse with disbelief. "I need answers. Now." Before Theron could respond, heavy footsteps echoed up the mountain path. Elder Garrison appeared in the doorway, his ancient frame moving with surprising urgency despite his 90 years. His weathered face was pale and his usually steady hands trembled as he gripped his walking staff. "I felt it," the old man whispered, his eyes fixed on the hammer. "The awakening. After all these years I felt it." He looked at Theron with a mixture of sadness and resignation. "You've revealed yourself, haven't you, boy?" "You know who he is?" Lydia demanded, finally finding her voice. The confusion in her tone was raw, vulnerable in a way none of them had ever heard before. Elder Garrison nodded slowly, his rheumy eyes never leaving Theron's face. "I've known since the day he arrived in our village 3 years ago, bloodied and broken, begging for nothing more than a place to hide from his past." The old man moved deeper into the forge, his walking staff clicking against the stone floor. "Captain, you and your men speak of legends and worthiness, but you don't understand what you've brought to our doorstep. That hammer doesn't choose its wielder based on moral character or noble heart." He gestured toward the weapon, which still pulsed with faint silver light. "It recognizes power, ancient, terrible power that has tasted the blood of gods and demons alike." Captain Roderick's hand tightened on his sword hilt. "What are you saying, old man?" "I'm saying you stand in the presence of Sir Theron the Titan Breaker, last of the Godsworn Knights, wielder of the blade Dawnrender and slayer of the demon Lord Vorthok." The words hit the forge like thunderbolts. Marcus stumbled backward, his face draining of color. Even the hardened royal guards shifted nervously, their eyes darting between Theron and the nearest exits. Lydia let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "That's impossible. The Titan Breaker was a legend, a story told to children about heroes who could level mountains and split the earth with their bare hands." "Not a legend," Elder Garrison said quietly. A man who fought in the War of Shadows 20 years ago, who stood alone against the armies of the Void when all hope was lost." He looked at Theron with infinite sadness. "A man who paid a price too terrible to bear and chose to disappear rather than face what he had become." Theron finally spoke, his voice heavy with old pain. "I asked you never to tell anyone, Garrison." "You also promised to keep your power hidden," the elder replied gently. "Some promises are meant to be broken when greater dangers emerge." As if summoned by his words, the temperature in the forge began to drop. Frost formed on the metal surfaces despite the roaring fire, and shadows gathered in the corners like living things. The hammer's silver light flickered and darkened, the runes shifting from silver to deep crimson. "What's happening?" Marcus whispered, his breath visible in the suddenly frigid air. Elder Garrison's face went ashen. The hammer wasn't just cursed, it was a prison. And by awakening it, we've let something out. The shadows in the corners began to coalesce, forming a writhing mass of darkness that spoke with the voices of the damned. When it took shape, it stood 8 feet tall, with eyes like burning coals and claws that could rend steel. 20 years, the shadow hissed, its voice like grinding glass. 20 years I've waited in that iron tomb, dreaming of revenge against the one who bound me. Its burning gaze fixed on Theron. "Hello, Titan Breaker. Ready for round 2, Captain?" Roderick and his men drew their swords, but their blades passed harmlessly through the creature's form. It laughed at their futile efforts, a sound like breaking bones. "Malachar," Theron said, and for the first time since they'd known him, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "I thought I'd destroyed you completely." "You destroyed my physical form, yes, but hatred is harder to kill than flesh." The shadow thing began to grow, filling the forge with its malevolent presence. "I've had 2 decades to plan your suffering. to imagine how I'll tear apart everyone you've grown to care about. Its burning eyes swept over the terrified humans, starting with the woman who mocked you. How fitting that she should be the first to die. Lydia tried to run, but tendrils of shadow wrapped around her legs, lifting her into the air. She struggled against the supernatural grip, her face twisted with terror. "Please," she gasped, looking at Theron with desperate eyes. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything I said, everything I did. Please don't let it kill me." For a moment, Theron stood frozen, 20 years of suppressed trauma warring with the man he'd tried to become. The last time he'd faced Malachar, the battle had cost him everything. His comrades, his purpose, his very sense of self. He'd sworn never to use that power again, never to risk becoming the monster he'd once been forced to embrace. But as he watched Lydia struggle in the demon's grasp, as he saw the terror in Marcus's eyes and the helplessness of the guards, he realized that some battles couldn't be avoided. "Garrison," he said quietly, "take everyone outside." "Theron, now." The authority in his voice was absolute. Elder Garrison herded the others toward the door, but Lydia was still trapped in the demon's coils. "Let her go, Malachar," Theron said, stepping forward. "Your quarrel is with me." "Oh, I intend to settle that quarrel thoroughly," the shadow replied. "But first I want you to watch as I tear her apart. I want you to feel that familiar helplessness, that rage that turns noble heroes into—" Theron moved faster than the eye could follow. One moment he stood 10 feet away. The next his hand was wrapped around the demon's throat, lifting the massive creature off the ground as easily as he had lifted the hammer. The change in him was dramatic. His pale skin now glowed with that same silver light, and his eyes blazed, with power that made the air itself tremble. The frightened apprentice was gone, replaced by something ancient and terrible and utterly implacable. "I am not the broken man I was 20 years ago," Theron said, his voice echoing with otherworldly resonance. "I've had time to heal, time to understand what I am and what I'm capable of. You made one mistake, demon." Malachar struggled against his grip, shadow claws raking uselessly across skin that had become harder than diamond. "What mistake?" "You threatened someone under my protection." The explosion of power that followed shook the entire mountain. Silver fire erupted from Theron's form, consuming the shadow demon in flames that burned away darkness itself. Malachar's screams echoed across dimensions before cutting off abruptly, leaving only silence and the lingering scent of ozone. When the light faded, Theron stood alone in the forge. His appearance returned to normal. The hammer of Malachar had crumbled to rust and dust, its power finally spent. Lydia lay unconscious but breathing near the far wall, her body unmarked by the supernatural encounter. The others returned cautiously, led by Elder Garrison. They found Theron kneeling beside Lydia, checking her pulse with gentle hands. "Is she?" Marcus began. "She'll be fine," Theron replied without looking up. The demon didn't have time to cause any real harm. Captain Roderick approached slowly, his sword sheathed but his posture still wary. "What happens now? Do you return to the capital? Take your place among the king's champions?" Theron shook his head as he helped Lydia to a sitting position, supporting her as consciousness slowly returned. "That man died 20 years ago. I'm just Theron now, a blacksmith's apprentice who happens to have some unusual talents. But your power will be used to protect this village and the people in it, nothing more." He met the captain's eyes with quiet resolve. "I've learned that true strength isn't about how much force you can bring to bear. It's about knowing when to use it and when to hold back." Lydia stirred in his arms, her eyes fluttering open. When she saw his face, she didn't flinch or pull away. Instead, she reached up with a trembling hand to touch his cheek. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't understand. I thought strength was about being better than others, proving your superiority." She looked around the forge, taking in the scattered remains of the demon's presence. "But you could have let that thing kill me. After everything I put you through, you could have walked away." "No," Theron said simply. "I couldn't have. That's not who I choose to be." Lydia nodded, tears streaming down her soot-stained cheeks. Will you teach me? Not just about smithing, but about real strength. Theron helped her to her feet, steadying her until she could stand on her own. We'll teach each other. I still have a lot to learn about being human. Captain Roderick cleared his throat. I'll report to the king that the hammer of Malachar has been destroyed and the threat contained. As for Sir Theron the Titan Breaker, he paused, studying the young man's face. I never found him, just a skilled apprentice who helped save several lives. Thank you, Theron said. As the royal guards prepared to leave, Marcus approached hesitantly. What happens to the forge? To our work? Lydia looked at Theron, then at her apprentices, her expression softer than any of them had ever seen. We keep working. We keep learning. And we remember that the strongest steel is forged through patience, not force. In the days that followed, word spread through the village about the strange events at the forge, though the details grew more fantastical with each telling. Some said they'd seen silver light blazing from the mountainside. Others claimed to have heard the roar of an ancient dragon. But in the forge itself, life settled into a new rhythm. Lydia's legendary pride had been tempered by humility, and she found herself a better teacher for it. She worked alongside her apprentices rather than above them, offering guidance instead of mockery. Theron continued his studies, but now Lydia watched him with different eyes. She saw the careful way he controlled his strength, the patience he showed with every task, the wisdom that came from someone who had faced the worst the world could offer and chosen to remain kind. Sometimes, late at night when the fire burned low, she would catch glimpses of the power that lay beneath his unassuming exterior. The way shadows seemed to bend away from him, or how the metal sang differently under his hammer, but she no longer felt the need to challenge or diminish him. Elder Garrison visited often, sharing tales of the old days with anyone willing to listen. But his favorite stories were not of gods and demons, of legendary battles and cosmic wars. Instead, he told of a young man who had learned that the greatest victory was not conquering others, but conquering the darkness within himself. And in the peaceful mountain village of Ashenvale, where the stars shone bright and the forge fire never died, Theron found something he had thought lost forever. A home worth protecting, and the strength to do it with gentle hands. The legend of the Titan Breaker had ended, but the story of Theron the Protector was just beginning.